Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very, very special guest with us today. And today we're talking about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. These questions that I'm asking are big questions, bigger than me and bigger than Dr. Jen here. And one of the questions I want to start off is asking, how can we increase the graduation rate in the minority community, especially among African American males, which is 59%. When you have Caucasian males, graduation rate, it's over 85%. That's a big problem. When we think about innovation and we think about the COVID-19 pandemic and we think about how we're going to have a vaccination and how that vaccination is going to be distributed. When I think about innovation and I think about pioneers, I think of Sarah Blakely, who only had $5,000 to her name, was working as a salesperson at Xerox and came up with Spanx, and now it's $1 billion company. When I think of innovation, I think of a young African-American lady by the name of Dawn Dixon, who was wanting to go out with her friends and probably have a happy hour. And every time she always had issues with heels. And trust me, ladies, you know about those heels. So she came up with the concept of having flat heels. And then she went to this luxury night spot and created the first vending machine for heels. And now she was one of the first women or African-American in history to raise over $1 million for an IPO. All of these things take innovation. All these things are about pioneers. I think of Katherine G. Johnson, who in the 1960s, the Jim Crow South, was a mathematician who John Glenn, the illustrious astronaut, would not trust anybody to do his calculations for the pioneers to the moon, except for if Katherine Johnson was his trajectory analysis. So innovation is important. And today it is my plum-pleasing pleasure and a privilege to have a dear friend who I've known for over a decade, her and her wonderful husband, Jack. They are wonderful people. You know, my mom always says, don't give me flowers when I'm dead, but give them to me while I can still smell the roses. And Jennifer is a college professor. She's a servant leader, a transformational leader. She's a mentor. She's a coach. She has broken many barriers in her life. She's gotten her PhD. And she broke 2 barriers within 2 organizations. She was the first radio station manager, breaking the glass ceiling. She is an innovator, and now a very, very special distinction. She is an author of the wonderful book called The Pioneer's Way. How are you doing, Jennifer?
I'm doing great, Gibson, and I'm doing even better after that introduction. Wow. I'm like, who is this person he's talking about?
It's you.
Thank you for that.
And so The Pioneer's Way, I want everyone to go to Amazon and make sure you get The Pioneer's Way. It's a very, very fascinating read. And according to you, Jennifer, what is a pioneer? What makes a pioneer?
Well, I think a pioneer is made up of several ingredients. And one of the things that I like to learn about is leadership. And the reason is because when we are called to lead, we don't want to just stay where we are and just work with the knowledge that we have. It's something that we want to continue to learn about. It's something that we want to continue to practice. And yes, we make mistakes, don't we?
Yeah.
But it was something as I was growing and coming up through Christian radio, that is my background, and becoming the first female station manager at 2 networks. I wanted to get better at what I did. It didn't matter what my gender was. So I began to study about it, and I began to learn about leadership. And as I began to think about that, and I'm getting to your question, I thought, gee, I thought leaders were supposed to be innovative. And that I found is not always the case. A lot of leaders these days really kind of back away from risk. And so as I started thinking about that, I thought, maybe we're looking at a very different sort of leader. And I thought about the pioneer and what made the pioneer very distinctive from the leader. And so I thought about it and I came up with several different things. And I want you to think about these things with me. One of the things is that pioneers are possibility driven. In other words, we just mentioned the word risk. They have a higher tolerance for risk than what I would call the status quo leader. They also continue to be curious or inquisitive throughout their lives. They've got a lot of questions. And why is that? Because typically pioneers are forging into new territories, or they're breaking boundaries, or they're constantly wanting to get better. And so there's these continual questions that may even plague the pioneer, drive him or her crazy until they find the answer.
Yes.
They're very, very, and then along with that is persistent. They continue to doggedly look for new paths. Or I think you mentioned COVID earlier. I'm sure you mentioned it. And we are looking for a cure in that area. And there have been pioneers previous to this, such as Jonas Salk, who was able to come up with the cure, the inoculation for polio. And some of your viewers who are older may remember that. A couple other P's are, they have what I call, I coined this, it's pomance. And I took that from the French word peau, which means skin, and rhymed it like romance, pomance. So it's a romance with their own skin in the game.
Wow.
Pioneers have to be involved in their ventures themselves. They don't just send people off to do their bidding, but they are so passionate about what they're doing
It's
that
funny.
they have
It's
to be
funny.
involved
It's funny that you say.
themselves.
It's funny that when you say skin in the game, I remember one time talking to Mr. Heisinger, Mr. Wayne Heisinger,
Oh,
and
yes.
yeah, the founder. He was the owner of the Dolphins and all these sports teams in South Florida, and the conversation came about with, there was an employee that had lost his company millions of dollars, and they were getting ready to fire him. And
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Heisinger said, no, 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 we're not going to fire him. He just got $1 million education. If we fire him, he's going to go to the competition, and he's going to always know in the back of his mind that he's never going to make that mistake. And this guy became one of the greatest revenue generators. So yes, risk and also learning from those mistakes also can catapult people as a pioneer as well.
And I think it takes someone like Wayne Heisinger to think out of the box like that, to make the
Yeah.
way for other pioneers. They are also very principled. They have conviction that given enough time and resources, they'll be able to accomplish their goals. And finally, they're very persuasive. In
Mm.
other words, they have a vision and they are able to get other people on board with that vision as well. So summing all of that up, I came up with a definition, and see if this rings true for you, Gibson, that when we think of a pioneer, we think of a persistent, risk-taking individual who ventures into new territory. That's very important, new territory, in order to accomplish a goal. And in so doing, they influence others to participate and realize that goal with them, and maybe even expand it one day.
You know, it's very fascinating that you framed it in that way. In the way you framed it in the book, it's very it's very old in the sense that it's an antiquitous, but then it's also very innovative in the sense of it being futuristic. And what's interesting about that is when you look at the current education system today, I find that a lot of it is, especially with young children, is the the establishment is trying to fit, circle shapes into square pods, and there's this notion of, uh, you know, almost over regulating a child's creativity. And when you think of, America, and what makes America different, you and I have traveled overseas in a lot of countries, but what makes America so different and what makes America so unique is America is one of the only nations on planet Earth that we can say was an idea. It was an idea. And in your book, you talk about the pilgrims, you talk about the people, the forefathers that came here. And America is an idea. And the idea is that no matter where you come from, no matter who you are, no matter if you were royal born or if you were just commonly born, if you come in America, that your fortunes can be somehow great, or something magnificent can happen to you. And it was pioneers. They came here. A lot of them, they died during the winter. There were animals, wild animals that attacked them and ate them. And there were so many challenges, but they did the very principles that is espoused in your book that got us to where we are today. In other words, they had to rough it out so that we can have some of the comforts that we have today.
You know, it takes pioneers to make the way for other pioneers. For example, if people hadn't seen the potential in me and given me the opportunity to step up and manage a radio station, knowing full well that I was a woman, but knowing also that I was capable of doing the job, and encouraging me and saying, my boss used to say, "You can do it, Jennifer." Even when I was young and I was learning the ropes, they had a vision of what I could accomplish for the organization. And as such, I'm thrilled today when I can turn around and create some of those opportunities for other people. So yes, as you said, pioneering has been something that human beings have done for centuries, I might even say millennia. And yet there are still opportunities and pioneers emerging today among some of our youth. And that's very, very exciting.
And I love the tradition, because we both come out of the tradition, the Hebrew tradition of Hasad, which is grace, providing a shade for someone that is, that has a scorched sun, or the Good Samaritan, and helping that person. And you've been helped. One of my favorite quotes is, "If you see a turtle on a fence post, know it got help getting there."
And it also needs help getting down.
Exactly. Or it's
so it
stuck
can
like Chuck,
continue
right?
on its journey.
Yeah. And so someone believed in you. Someone pushed you in that right direction. And that's important. That's important for people to have as pioneers, to have those coaches and those mentors and those leaders and everything. And you brought up something very, very interesting. You said that you being a woman, you being a female, how is that dynamic? Are pioneers, is it a natural thing, or is it a nurture thing? Can anybody become a pioneer, or is it something that you're just fundamentally born with?
I think anyone can become a pioneer. The important thing is that wherever people are, and sure, there were many pioneers, Gibson, that were well-resourced, that came from wealthy families, that had a silver spoon put in their mouth, and were born, to a certain amount of we would say today, privilege. However, I think that anybody can become a pioneer. And one of the things I thought about was, usually it began with an irritant within the pioneer's life.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I think of Dr. Horace Wells. He was a dentist in Connecticut in the 1840s. Now, I wouldn't want to be a dentist in the 1840s. I wouldn't want to be the patient of a dentist in the 1840s, because
Wow.
this is way before, well before there was any type of the dental implements we have today, and most importantly, anesthesia. And Dr. Wells really was, I would say, traumatized by practicing his own craft on people who really needed him. People who came to him, they didn't have the hygiene today that then that they do today. And Dr. Wells was actually a part of that. He had a slogan saying, "The clean tooth does not decay." And back then they didn't use toothbrushes. They were around, but they would use something called a chew stick to try to, clean the teeth. So he saw a lot of people in a lot of pain with toothaches. And many times it was so bad he had to pull the tooth. And he would actually give up his dental practice. Wow. Because he was so shaken up by pulling the teeth, and the poor person sitting in the chair, the dental chair, was also, traumatized because there was no anesthesia. And so it took something
Wow, no,
like that.
no pun intended, but that really bites.
It and when you lose your teeth, you don't.
Yes, yes,
And that's
exactly.
the whole thing, is that, he saw a different future. But at first was the irritant that got him thinking, how could things change? And he envisioned a different future.
I, I
And
love I love how you say that it started with an irritant,
yes, and
Um,
everyone has them. We look
mhm.
around, you mentioned several issues that are very near and dear to your heart
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
beginning of this broadcast.
yes.
And so the question becomes, we can't do everything, but what will we do to bring a better tomorrow? How will we get involved to make a change within our own spheres of influence? And
I
so
love
that's why I think people can be empowered to be pioneers right where they are.
I love that. Now, I want you to imagine with me, I'm in a foreign country and there's this dog, okay? And the whole time the dog is whimpering, just almost like crying. It's like an excruciating pain. And so I said to the gentleman that was my host, I said, what's up with this dog? I mean, it's so sad. It's crying. He says, look over by the feet, and there's the dog is laying up against a nail. And I said, we got to help this dog. And he said, he said in this country, he said when the dog when the dog when the pain is great enough, then the dog will get up on its own volition and the dog will move. And I thought about that. I said, if you look at some of the ailments that we have as a society, if you look at some of the problems that we all have, a lot of times we as a people, we tolerate some of the injustices. We tolerate some of the mediocrity that's in our own lives, that are in our own uh, profession, and our own spheres of influence. We tolerate a lot of it. And so I always say, when that becomes uh, unbearable, then we start to innovate. As they say, necessity is the mother of all invention. And
Yes.
and I love that. And I love you also talk about the three legs. You talk about the quest. You talk about being on the trail. You also talk about the arrival. Would you just walk us through those steps? First of all, the quest.
Sure, I'd be real happy to do that. So we started with step one already, and that is the irritant. So it's like that dog that's sitting up against the nail. It's
Mhm.
it's like we have to get up and realize, hey, this is a problem. You also have to realize maybe I'm the one to do something about it.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's the first step. The next is the trajectory. It's like, where do I go from here? It's that envisioning a different tomorrow. And
Mhm.
as you start envisioning a future without that irritant, you start to say, what's my way? How can I move from this point where I'm irritated? Let's say that's point A, and we see that tomorrow, which, there's a different tomorrow. Maybe there's 3 or 4 steps, maybe there's 5 steps, and we begin to think, how do we get out of here practically? So you
Yes.
may start writing some of those things down. Then we think of the equipment. Okay, so if we're going to make this happen, what do we need? What are some of the tools that we need
Mhm.
to go forward? And then the last part of the first leg that I put in the book is the team. The pioneer typically doesn't go alone. There's a team that's behind him or her that is enabling him or her to go forward. We all have strengths, we have weaknesses, and we need to surround ourselves with people who are able to offset some of those weaknesses and fortify some of our strengths. So that's the first step. Now, while we're on the trail, while we're in the process of pioneering, I have a chapter called Thrival as a Mindset, and it's putting 2 words together: survival and thriving. And you
Wow,
don't
I
usually
love
think of
that. I
those
love
two
that.
going
I
together,
love that.
but it's having that. And this is something, when I think of you, Gibson, having that attitude where it's like, I am going to survive this but I'm going to do it. I'm going to have the attitude that I can do it. And I'm going to have the attitude that there will be a positive outcome. So I
Mhm.
have several stories in there of people who have overcome adversity and have done so, not complaining, but done it in a way that they were able to accomplish the big goals that they set for themselves. Then there is, we ultimately, as pioneers, run into the unknown. It's like, okay, we've gone off the map.
Yes,
So we're
yes,
not in Kansas anymore,
yes.
as it's said in The Wizard of Oz. And so, how do you make your way forward in a land where no one has been? We talk about that. Also, I think it's important for pioneers to set aside some time for rest
Mm.
and then to enjoy the scenery as they are going along. Think about Lewis and Clark, or some
Oh,
of the great
yeah.
explorers that we have known in the past, and some from present day. I'm thinking of James Cameron, who went in the Challenger Deep all the way down to the Mariana Trench, to the
Wow.
deepest part of our ocean here on the earth. And
Yes.
some of the things that he saw that may have been, even though he was in the dark, and there was a team that he was connected to at the top of the water, some of the things that he went down and on the ocean floor and laid eyes on some creatures that none of us have ever seen. Then invariably, if we're with a team, you know this, there's conflict. So how does the pioneer deal with conflict? And then finally, there's ethics involved in this, isn't there?
Yes,
So the
absolutely.
pioneer has to make sure that there is good that is happening as a result of this, because we can recount many times in history where people have pioneered, but the outcome has been very, very evil and people have been harmed. And so
Yes.
this is not
Like
the
there
thrust of this book.
there's definitely some what I call evil genius syndrome. Now, I want you to tell us about a time where you've overcome adversity, because people think that you know, we're living in an era right now of Instagram, of social media, and people always see the lifestyle of these people and they want to have other people's lifestyle. But they don't realize the work that it takes for them to achieve that. I remember going into a locker room of an NFL team, and it was I was there before the game, and then I went in after the game. And when you see what these men have to go through, some of them literally, they have fingers, like they have fingers hanging off, have to be sewn together, and it's truly like the gladiators. Okay, and you look at the television and all you see is the glory, but you don't know that a lot of the guts that went into it. And I remember Michelangelo once said, he says, if people knew how hard I had to work for my mastery, perhaps it would not seem so full of wonder, you know? And I want you to tell us about a time where you've had some adversity and how you use some of these principles, these wonderful principles we're talking about now, to overcome those adversities.
Well, I remember a time that seemed very, very dark in my life. I had just become a station manager of my first radio station, and we had a very thin staff. And a lot of times, I loved what I did. I loved the fact that I had a shiny new title of station manager, but people don't see, as you said, the work that goes behind that. There was a lot of cleaning up of the station that I had to do. And in fact, I also was running the morning shift. So I was also doing morning drive as well as managing the station and trying to clean it up. I mean, physically, literally clean it up at the same time, because it had
Wow.
been neglected for a while, and that's why I was sent there. So I would get up very early in the morning around 4:30, and then sometimes by the end of the day, I was still there 12 hours later, and the sun had set, especially during the winter months. And this was up in the Northeast, so there was a smaller window of time. And I did not know that I was getting affected by workaholism. I was getting affected by the fact that I was seeing very few human beings, because I had to be up so early in the morning and in bed at night. I was single, So I was returning home to an apartment with nobody there except my 2 little dogs. And I did not know that this was having an adverse effect on me physically, mentally, and spiritually. And so before I knew it, I had slipped into depression. So I was I was really struggling with that. I was becoming resentful toward the listeners. These were people I didn't even see. And I was around the New Haven area, and I remember thinking, like Jonah, New Haven is my Nineveh. God, please help me.
Wow.
And I think that's when you need to reach out. And many pioneers can fall into this, like, I got this, I can handle this myself. Back to some of our American culture that we've talked about. It's like, I'm independent, I can do this, I'll just pull myself up by my bootstraps. But this is the time that we really need balance. We need other people. We need to be humble and say, hey, I need some help here.
Yeah.
Something's not right. And
Yeah.
so I ended up getting some professional help. I ended up getting some time to rest. And I also discussed that in the book, taking time to disengage from that thing that you're so passionate about, just to get some rest and different perspective. So taking some of these steps to care for yourself, to have other people you trust speak to you and say, hey, maybe you need to take it a little easy here. Those are all things that are very, very helpful for the pioneer to then step up and be able to move forward. Because if you don't care for yourself, you're not going to move forward. Some part of you, your body is going to say, no more. And
Yeah.
you'll be stopped, and you will not realize that pioneering dream.
Wow. That's very deep. It's very deep that you went through that. And nothing that we do in life happens in a vacuum. And you have always been someone that has at very high standards, and people would say very high excellence. Where does that come from? Is that something in your childhood?
For me, it's something I would believe that's innate. I am the firstborn. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't go into the psychology of being the firstborn and being the overachiever. I was also the tattler too. I guess those two go together. Um, I also realized early on that if you do well, you're recognized. And so I think that also fortified my desire to do well. And in some ways that can be very bad, because then you start on this performance and approval cycle. So you
Yeah.
have to realize, what is my motivation for doing this?
Mm.
And with pioneering, when you have this dream of creating a better future, whether it's innovating, solving a medical problem, creating a new tool, whether it be in construction or for medicine or for science or for an organization, that you realize, this is the mission, this is why I'm doing this. And then let all that other superficial stuff like self-glorification just peel off, because that won't get you anywhere.
I
And
call it
then
ego.
realize,
I
I'm
call it
sorry,
ego. I call it ego.
the old ego,
And
right?
ego stands for edging God out. Whenever we
You're
whenever we operate out of our ego, we just took God out of the equation. And failure
We
is
did.
guaranteed.
And
Yeah.
we put ourselves as part of the equation.
Exactly. Exactly. And
And so
so
humility is so important.
we are in a time right now where um the last time something like this happened in our world was about 100 years ago in 1918.
Yes.
And so we need innovators. We need innovators. Innovators are game changers. Now, what are some, because we talk about some macro um, pioneering, would you get into a little bit of the pioneering? In other words, what are some ways that we can be effective pioneers on a daily basis on a micro level?
Yeah. And that's where we really have to have the mission before us. there was a great theologian in Pennsylvania. His name was Dr. There's my R's, Dr. Donald Gray Barnhouse. And he said, it's through drudgery that we advance. And a lot of pioneering is that day-to-day, daily drudgery. And some of the changes to make big changes are actually small changes. And some of those changes happen right in our homes, happen right in our workplaces. And so doing something, just for example, if I have a new employee and they're in the radio context or they're in the classroom, then taking that time to show this new person a method is creating a change for tomorrow. Now that newer person's going to grow older, you're going to grow older. And as new technology comes along, they're going to adapt. And pretty soon, you don't know that person who may be 10 years in their career and you may be 20 years in your career, they'll be showing you the new ropes
That's
with
true.
the
That's true.
technology.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we advance together. And as I said, pioneers often operate in teams. And so listening to the people who are around you where the rubber meets the road is very, very important. And so you make those incremental changes daily. And sometimes it's a struggle because people don't want to change.
And
So you're dealing with that as well.
and I'm glad you brought that up, because that was my next thing that I was going to get into, is the resistance to change. Now, I read a book one time. It was called Change or Die. Have you read that book?
No, I have not read that book, but I've heard a similar expression,
So so
innovator
basically,
die.
so
Yes.
basically it was a study, and the study basically outlined different scenarios where people were in real life scenarios, or some of them were like they were created just to prove a point. And almost in 98% of the time, human beings were such creatures of habit that most people would rather die. Like, they would be forced. It'd be like, hey, you need to stop eating all of this starch, or you need to stop eating all of this type of food, or you're going to die. And there was so hard for people to shift, or so hard for people to change. Now, what do you recommend? Let's say, for example, you're in a company or you're in an organization and you have these innovative ideas, and people are like, well, we can't really implement them because, we just don't do that around here. I remember the story uh, of a lady who went to her mom and says, Mom, why do we during the Thanksgiving season, why do we always cut the legs of the turkey and put it in the oven? So she's like, I never thought of that. So she went and asked her grandmother, Grandma, why do we always cut the legs of the turkey and put it in the oven? She says, I don't know. Let me go ask my mom. Her mom was still alive. Well, came to find out, back in the day when the grandmother was making turkeys, and her grandmother, they had such a small oven that they had to cut the legs off. But we just do
That's
things.
funny.
Yeah, we just do things and don't even think about it. We don't put any thought into it. So what would you recommend for someone that has innovation, that has ideas, that has all these new things that they want to accomplish, but they might be in an organization or a context or some sort of ecclesiastical legalistic structure that prevents them from moving forward, and they get frustrated? I'm talking about they're so frustrated they're ready to pull out their hair. What do you recommend in that scenario?
I would recommend you don't pull out your hair. It might not grow back. But to take a big step back, you have to look at something change holistically. I would recommend looking at some of these 6 P's that we've talked about: being persistent, being willing to take a measured risk. Those are all things that the pioneer is going to have to kind of go out on the ledge with some of these ideas. But sometimes reality hits the pioneering ideal, right? So
Yeah.
that organization may not have the resources to implement the new idea. That's a very different scenario than saying, I'm not going to implement the new idea because I don't want to change. So take all of these things into consideration. And yes, I've run into these situations where it's like, oh, we don't want to change, or we don't, we just don't do that. Or saying we don't have the resources to be able to do that. As you're being persistent, I would say to the pioneer, be persistently or whimsically persistent. In other words, I know you're frustrated, but try not to get angry with the people that you're trying to share your ideas with, particularly if they're your leaders, because you don't want to end up fired at the end of the
Yeah,
day. You
yeah,
want to be seen as
yeah,
a very valuable
yeah,
individual. Don't risk it all. A lot of people will take their chips and say, I'm all in on this. Well,
yes,
sometimes when you're all in, you could, if it's inclement weather and you're out on Arctic ice, you could die.
yeah,
Well, take a measured risk. Say, okay, can we take so much percent, a smaller percent of our budget, and make that for research, instead of saying, well, I want 10% of the whole budget, to go to research. Start out small.
and do
and
like
and
these micro tests. I love that. I love that.
Yes, and the scriptures do say, do not despise small beginnings.
I love that.
So, when you have your skin in the game, be excited about your idea, and be willing to step up and say, okay, I will implement it. Because many times leaders, when you come with an idea, they'll say, oh, I like that. Why don't you do it? And
Yes,
you
yes.
be willing to do it yourself. So these are some of the things, the principles that I've laid out in the book that I would recommend that pioneers try. And again, start with small steps. And then as the path begins to clear, as you begin to trailblaze, you can go a little further.
When you write a book, you write a book to implement some sort of change, but in the process, you're changed as well. What's changed in you in this whole process of writing this book?
I think the reality of the saying that amateurs wait to be inspired, but professionals show up to work.
That's deep.
That's a writing principle, and it's something that I saw in a documentary, and I don't remember the documentary's name, but I remember it was about an artist. In other words, there's this romanticism about inspiration. And inspiration is great. When we get into the zone, or we get into flow as leaders at work, it's a wonderful feeling when we look up and 2 hours have gone by and we've accomplished so much and we feel really good about it. Well,
Yeah.
that doesn't always happen, does it?
No.
There are rainy days when we get up and we feel sleepy or we feel foggy. And sometimes we have to really push through those barriers, whether they be physical or mental, to be able to do some type of work and be able to move ourselves forward. By drudgery, we advance
Yeah.
sometimes, and that's not
Have,
always
have you
fun.
have you have you heard Mother Teresa's story? It's very similar to that.
Which story?
She's obviously known for being very altruistic, but
Yes.
she went through a lot of her years of not really being truly inspired. Have you heard that account?
I heard a little bit about it, but I'd be willing to
Well,
hear what you have to
basically,
say.
basically with Mother Teresa, she comes from a well-to-do background, and she became a missionary in Calcutta, India. And her whole deal was, of course, making sure that people that were in the streets of Calcutta that was dying like animals, that they died with dignity. That was
Mm,
her phrase. I want them to die with dignity because all of us were made in the image of God. And so that was her deal. But she went through a period of over 30 years, because in the beginning she would have visitations by angels and the Holy Spirit, and God would speak to her, and it was like this really intimate, passionate, like, oh my goodness, like angels are coming all down her back or whatever. But towards the end, she said she went through a drought of almost 30 years where she would pray and she would feel nothing. It was like a cold ice box, and there was no intimacy, there was no warm and fuzzy feelings. But she just kind of just said, you know what, every day I'm going to go out and I'm going to show love. and she would cry. And when she eventually passed, and people read her journal, and most of her scribings were about her saying, God, like, what's going on? I serve you every day. I reach out to the Dalits, the poorest of the poor, the untouchables, but there's no sense of, there's no feeling involved here. And sometimes, in life, we don't have the luxury of going by our feelings. We have to go by our faith, and we just have to just do, as someone always says, to do the next best thing, right? To just to do whatever is best. Martin King used to say, if you can't run, then you better walk. If you can't walk, then you better crawl. If you can't crawl, just move in the direction of where you need to be going to, And that was from Martin Luther King. So what is it that you hope most fundamentally that people get from reading your book?
The most fundamental thing I hope people get is that every day people can pioneer. And every day people should pioneer, because in our own spheres of influence, we see those things that need to be changed. And they won't be changed, as you have just very well said, if people don't take steps to change them. And it may not be a big problem. It may not end up with the Nobel Prize being awarded to you. Maybe it will. But the big thing is that we go forward into our communities and bit by bit do the work of redemption that God has called us to do. And so that's what I hope people will get from this book. In this book, there are many, many stories of people in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, emerging pioneers from various backgrounds, men and women, different circumstances with different passions and different missions. And they all come about it in different ways. And they all have a hope for a better tomorrow. Some of them realize that hope. Some of them are pioneering right now and are, again, hoping for change in the future. And I hope that people, as they read these stories, that they will be inspired and they will go on a journey.
Awesome. Now, we like to do something fun on this broadcast, and we like to, it's a game that we play. It's called One and Done. Now, you and I are both communicators, and we love to talk, but one of the rules is you're only allowed to say one word. Okay? So here's the first question. First question is, what's the first thing you grab in the morning?
A pug.
Who is your biggest inspiration in life?
My mother.
What do you think that people notice about you the most?
My eyes.
What do you hope people notice about you?
That I'm younger than I am.
That's a very good answer. Very good answer.
It's not one word, but it's an answer.
We get the sentiment. What's your biggest weakness?
My mouth.
Your biggest strength?
My mouth.
I knew that was coming. What's the perfect and most ideal age to be?
45.
High school, awesome or terrible?
In between.
Cats or dogs?
Dog, definitely. Pug.
Best adjective to describe you?
Scintillating.
Wow. Very good adjective.
Sparkly. I guess sparkly would be.
Why do you love your best friend so much?
Because I've known her since she was 3, and we know everything about each other.
Wow, that's a long best friend.
That's right. Over 50 years.
Wow, that's awesome. Where do you want to go more than any place in the world?
Rhode Island. That's also 2 words, but it's 1 state.
Why Rhode Island?
Because I was born there.
Wow, there's no place like home, right?
Thank you, Dorothy. That's true.
Beaches?
No, it was Glinda the Good Witch. I'm sorry. It was Glinda the Good Witch that said, there's no place like home. Okay.
Beaches or snow?
Snow.
Wow. What is your absolute most number one biggest pet peeve?
Condescension.
What does someone have to do to instantaneously get on Jennifer's good side?
Offer me chocolate.
What about your bad side?
Be condescending.
Okay,
That's the pet
okay.
peeve.
What is your least favorite attribute about yourself?
The fact that I have to color my hair every 3 weeks.
It looks nice. It looks nice.
Thank
Um,
you.
uh, is it okay to sleep with socks on?
No, but my husband does, so it's okay for him. Whatever your feet tell you.
Coffee or tea?
Both.
What's your love language?
Gifts.
Do you believe in ghosts?
No.
What's your vice?
My mouth. Oh, you mean like what do I go to that's
Yeah,
really bad?
yeah.
Carbohydrates.
Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn?
LinkedIn.
Favorite artist, musical artist?
I have so many. The Police.
Oh, Roxanne is my favorite Police song. You know which one I'm talking about?
Yes. Every little thing she does is magic.
Yes, yes. There you go. I bet you didn't know I knew that about the Police. Anyways, I digress. I digress. Left brain or right brain?
I'm in between.
What is your Hagward's house?
I don't know. I'm a trekker.
Okay. Ask for permission or ask for forgiveness?
Forgiveness. That's what pioneers do.
Um, do you trust someone until proven otherwise? Or do you
Yes.
okay. So we got that one. Um, is it any situation okay to lie to someone to protect their feelings?
Say that, frame that again.
Is there any situation that it's okay to lie to someone in order to protect their feelings?
Yes.
If you had a choice between love or money, what would you choose?
Love. I
TV.
had to think about that.
$1 billion or love? I'll buy it, right? TV shows or movies?
Movies. There's a
Books,
longer story arc.
books or books or magazines?
Books.
Describe what would bring you the ultimate happiness in life.
I eventually would like to go home to my home state of Rhode Island and become a docent at the Friends of Hearthside campus. And at that campus,
What is that? What is that?
the Friends of Hearthside are the stewards of several buildings in Lincoln, Rhode Island, one of which is the Moffett Mill, which my great-great-great-grandfather purchased in 1850 and ran as one of the first industrial mills in the country. And I would like to be a little old lady there and take care of the archives of the mill.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow, that is profound.
eventually. Well, I
Wow.
don't know if it's profound, but it's something
Wow.
I would like to do.
That sounds
Whether little school children come and look at the mill and say, hey, this is how it was, or if people want to come and study the Industrial Revolution and how it started, I want
wow.
to be there and help them.
So your great great grandfather was one of the pioneers of the Industrial Revolution.
I would say yes. The
Wow.
first being the Slater Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and the Moffett Mill is in Lincoln, Rhode Island. Yep. And it's
Wow.
available for people to visit.
That is profound. That is profound. Now, I usually end on a very morbid note, so we'll end on a morbid note. And
Okay.
here's the morbid note. So now it's your funeral, and all your loved ones are there, and they're eulogizing you. They're saying all these things about you. What do you want them to say about you? The final, ultimate legacy. What do you want your legacy to be?
I want my legacy to be that she helped me pioneer my life's mission.
That's deep.
Not just in word, but in deed.
Wow. Wow. That's profound. That's profound. Well, as I said in the beginning, it has truly been a pleasure and a privilege to be in your presence. I know that many people are blessed and they're going to be educated, they're going to be entertained, and they're going to be empowered by listening to what you have to say and then getting your book. And if you want to find out more information, please go to jenniferepperson.com.
It's jenniferhaydenepperson.com.
And the Hayden is spelled
Hayden.
Yes.
Yes.
So Jennifer Hayden Epperson, EPPERSON.com, to find out about this wonderful author who's had a very illustrious career in broadcasting and being a professor. And now she's a wonderful author. Get this book. And here's one thing I can guarantee you. If you get this book and you put it into practice, it will change your life, the people around you's life, and many, many generations to come.
Thank you so much, Gibson, for having me. And when you go to the website, there is an opportunity for you to have one of the chapters for free. When you click on the Pioneer's Way and scroll down past the book, the description of the book, you'll see a link, and then you can have the chapter for free. See what you think about it.
Awesome.
Thank you for this opportunity. What a pleasure.
So thank you. Thank you. It's been a blessing. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Please go to gibsonsylvestre.com/podcast to subscribe. Thank you for being a part of my listening family.